told by a doctor that you do have mercury toxicity and you are especially susceptible or hypersensitive, where is the guidance? Where is the corroboration? What is a patient to do? You have a doctor, and then the rest of the establishment, my family was like, what are you talking about? You know, and then it proved to be the right thing, but it's a very difficult issue because there's just not any agreement out there between the alternative, complementary, and integrative medicine folks and then the mainstream doctors. I think that the answer lies somewhere.
1 minute.
1 minute. I'm not going to get to ask me questions. With Dr. Clarkson. Dr. Clarkson, I think you all know, is an expert on mercury toxicity. Back in 1992, he asked, what are the mechanisms of tolerance and defense against mercury? Under what circumstances do these defenses fail? What makes some individuals more resistant than others? The answer to this is key to present and future risk assessments. There is much established literature about hypersensitivity, and I will be putting that in my written statement so that you can see it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Flowers.
Yes, I'm Marie Flowers, and I'm from the Roanoke, Virginia area. I received my first amalgam fillings when I was around 12 years old. Other than having 3 miscarriages when I was in my late 20s because I had low progesterone, I was healthy. I did not know that mercury contributes to problems with hormones and infertility. By the time I was 46, I had accumulated 11 mercury fillings, and Dr. J, whom I liked, was my dentist. It took 34 years to experience my first neurological symptom, and that was an occasional numbness in my face. My symptoms did not occur in a mere 5 to 7 years, like what was in the children's amalgam trials. And the ADA came out stating that the children had no neurological problems, but this was only after 5 to 7 years. It took me 34 years to develop neurological symptoms. I told Dr. J about my face numbness, but he continued to take out and put in mercury fillings, all the time allowing me to breathe mercury vapor. But my dentist didn't do anything wrong. He didn't violate the standards of care in dentistry. It's normal for dentists to expose their patients to mercury vapor while drilling out fillings because most of them do not use any respiratory protection for their patients. I saw a neurologist in early 2001, but he had no definite diagnosis for the numbness. In June, I developed Bell's palsy, which is an inflammation in the 7th cranial nerve, which I understand is in the peripheral nervous system. The neurologist put me on 12 days of prednisone. The consumer information sheet from the pharmacist warned me that before you have any kind of medical or dental treatments, tell the doctor or dentist that you're using this medicine because it makes you more susceptible to illnesses. Unfortunately, the sheet did not warn me to stay away from mercury poisoning dentists when I had a lowered immune system. I was taking this prednisone and was on vacation in July of 2001 when my tooth with a large amalgam filling broke off. So I went to a local dentist and he put a patch on that tooth, and immediately I started tasting metal. That is a symptom of oral galvanism when you start tasting metal, and it occurs when dentists put dissimilar metals together in contact with the mercury. It causes a battery-like effect which forces the mercury to leak out of the filling at a faster rate. Now I was absorbing more mercury vapor than ever before because of the broken tooth and because of this patching material causing oral galvanism. I didn't know that metallic taste was a symptom of mercury toxicity, and neither did Dr. J when I questioned him about it 1 month later. But it was the symptom of metallic taste is right there on the material safety data sheet for the amalgam capsule, but probably my dentist never read the material safety data sheet. I told Dr. J I'd been on prednisone a month earlier, but that made no difference either. So he went on drilling more than usual in order to fit the crown on the tooth. He left in some of the mercury filling and some of the patching material. Then he placed a temporary crown over top of all of this mess. I went home to experience an increased metallic taste, along with nausea and feeling like I was dying. Mercury started leaking out of this tooth and ran down into my gums, making a little blue line around the gum line of that tooth, and the gum started swelling. 5 days after Dr. J drilled into that tooth and put on the temporary crown, I felt movement in my brain for the first time. 8 days after Dr. J drilled, I felt a little circle of heat in the top of my head, and my scalp was tingling and was feeling very sore. I had a slight headache. On the 9th day after Dr. J drilled, I woke up that morning and my whole brain was on fire. My brain was vibrating inside my skull like it was trying to jump out. My head throbbed, and it felt like someone had beating on my skull. I had electrical charges shooting throughout my body from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. MS doctors call this Lhermitte's phenomena. I call it mercury hitting the brain. I became allergic to foods. When I ate vinegar, a big lump would come out on the side of my head that would burn and ache, and I would cry in pain. I didn't know that the acid from the vinegar was causing more mercury to be released from my fillings. I became chemically sensitive, had chronic fatigue, visual disturbances, tingling in my hands and feet, dizzy, confused. Things appeared to me like I was in the twilight zone. I lay in the bed for hours with heating pads. I saw 7 doctors in total, including my neurologist, trying to find a diagnosis. My neurologist said that burning of the brain was not a symptom of MS and had no idea why my brain was on fire. I became angry and paranoid. If my husband would dare to disagree with me, I'd pick up something and hit him. I got down on the floor at church and became hysterical. What was worse was the confusion and the memory loss, not remembering where I parked my car, not being able to make a long-distance phone call to call a doctor, wandering around my home in a daze. One Sunday morning, I woke my husband up at 1 a.m. and screamed at him for an hour, begging him to help me find out what I should do next. When mercury is in your brain, it's very hard to make medical decisions. Finally, I found a doctor belonging to the American College for the Advancement of Medicine. He tested me for heavy metals using a DMSA urine challenge test. Even though my levels did not show up very high, there is a reason for that. I'm a poor excreter of mercury. And Dr. Boyd Haley will talk tomorrow about how some people cannot excrete mercury very well. He has this published in peer-reviewed literature.
1 minute.
And a study from the UK states that for some people, sensitive individuals, it has not been possible to set a level for mercury in the blood or the urine below which mercury-related symptoms will not occur. So there is no safe level of mercury for some people. Dr. C, my doctor that I found, said that patient's history is consistent with heavy metal toxicity. He did not say I was allergic to mercury. He did not say I was hypersensitive. He said heavy metal toxicity. And I think it's insulting to call a poisoning an allergy. Ragweed is an allergy. If I were poisoned by arsenic, you would not say that I was sensitive to arsenic. You would say I was poisoned. Dr. C gave me natural hormones for my memory loss and my confusion, and because it had disrupted my hormones, and he gave me a lot of pills. I took DMSA, I did better, but I can't get all the mercury out of my...
Sorry to interrupt you. Thanks, Ms. Flowers. Thank you for your testimony. Next will be Mr. Reeves. If you would just click on the microphone, please. Thank you.
I'm Bob Reeves. I'm here on behalf of the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, myself and my client, Dr. David Barnes. And I'm hoping we can get this PowerPoint to work. While we're doing that, let me just say that I'm here to speak on the behalf of the dentist dilemma. If a dentist believes that mercury is toxic or can cause problems, he's in a real dilemma. He's in a dilemma if he doesn't, because the manufacturers, and there's the first slide, the manufacturers give very explicit warnings in regard to the toxicity of mercury. This is dispersal, well, wait a minute, I think I've skipped a slide here. Dispersal is the most widely used amalgam. Dr. Macker talked about it today. and it gives these warnings, erythrism and the things that go with that, hallucinations, loss of memory, etc. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because of the learned intermediary doctrine. A dentist is obligated to pass on the warnings of a manufacturer just as a doctor is, and I'm sure all you neurologists know about this. If you have a drug you're giving a patient, you have to warn about the side effects of the drug. These are the side effects that the manufacturers warn of. This is an old MSDS from dispersal oil, and I'm not sure why this was taken off. It was on their website, it was on their literature. It warned about renal deficiency, allergies, children under 6, expectant mothers. That's no longer used by them, although I'd suggest to you it probably should be. Mercury accumulates from amalgam fillings. This is the FDA's own response to me. In 1993, I filed a petition with the FDA asking that warnings be given and a number of other things, including a ban on these fillings. And their response included this fact that mercury can accumulate, that it causes higher blood and urine levels, that it causes hypersensitivity in people, that people may respond adversely to the additional exposure. And they said, as you'll see there, the bottom two things I've highlighted, special controls and labeling. They recommended that, and they recommended, I think, Category 2, and this was back in 1997, over 9 years ago. Nothing has happened since then, except the body of knowledge implicating this has increased. This is a quote by the toxicologist at ATSDR talking about the issue, and the reason I put this in here, there's always this statement that there's no known disease that certainly is caused by mercury from fillings, and therefore we're going to continue to use it and it's safe. Well, what he's saying there is that there's a lot of reasons to be careful about it because there's a lot of issues. There are a lot of, as he says, there's not a smoking gun, but there are bullets all over the floor. And that's true for this issue. These are the summary of mercury symptoms from ATSDR. And the reason I think this is important is that mercury obviously causes a lot of things. The woman testified earlier about flu today, and we'll see here in a minute flu symptoms. Mercury interferes with the entire biological processes of the body. It interferes with sulfhydryls and can interfere anywhere and cause any kind of symptom. And there's a quote from Clarkson that I don't have on here, but Clarkson says that's one of the reasons it's hard to deal with mercury, because there's not a signature symptom, a signature toxicity like there is for most toxins. But these are all from ATSDR and other well-known references about mercury and what it can cause. Decline of intellect is one of them. Bleeding gums, and I don't have it on here, but there's a lot of dental evidence that from the dental journals that mercury causes periodontal disease, and periodontal disease is being implicated in all kinds of problems now. There seem to be connections between periodontal disease and various heart conditions, strokes, etc. And let's see, there's the flu symptoms, chronic headaches. Now, if mercury can cause chronic headaches, it's not a disease like MS, but it is something that can be a problem. So where's the dentist in this? If the dentist is going to provide his patient with informed consent and follow the learned intermediary doctrine set out specifically in a case involving mercury amalgam and Barnes versus Kerr, then he has to inform the patient of this. Yet, the ADA has a gag rule that they hardly admit to, but this is applied by state dental boards. And for instance, in North Carolina, in 2005, the North Carolina Dental Board published something for all dentists saying, you can't make a reference that mercury fillings are harmful. Well, if you're going to give those warnings at the start for dispersal oil, you are certainly indicating there's something that may be going on with mercury fillings. Freiberg testified in front of the FDA in 1991 that mercury was an unsuitable dental filling material. He was brought over from Sweden for that purpose, and it's logical that you can see why the Swedes have taken a different attitude about this material. The National Academy Press published a document about anecdotal reports need to be pursued vigorously. And it also talked about the inadequate training of most physicians. That's not to say physicians are inadequate, but most physicians are not trained a great deal in toxicology, and I think that includes most neurologists, at least that I know.
It's 1 minute.
Robert Feldman made an association between mercury and MS years ago. This is literature about it. With that, I'll close, but I'll suggest to you that the FDA should, at the very least, establish warnings for this substance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves, for your testimony. Our next speaker will be Ms. Madronio, if I pronounce that properly.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Thank you. Please.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Doris Madronero, and I am here not with any financial interest, but with good heart and spirit. I am grateful to the panel members and the FDA for this opportunity, but I must ask, why is it that Sweden, Denmark, and Germany have restricted the use of mercury in dental amalgam, and the United States supports putting mercury into the mouths of millions? Effective May 12, 2006, New York State mandates that mercury separators be installed at dental facilities. The New York State Dental Association questioned the science, reiterating, if after an exhaustive examination of the data, the New York State Dental Association were to believe that amalgam separators were justified on a cost-benefit basis, it would support such a mandate. According to Webster's dictionary, exhaustive means leaving nothing out, covering every possible detail. Reading volumes of journals and historic documents, indeed simple common sense leaves this mother and countless others asking why mercury is still in dental amalgam. In our market-driven society, the theme of a cost-benefit analysis leans heavily on dollars. Trade-offs and equivalencies must be reviewed to consider the interests of all, with alternatives explicitly explained to reflect the costs of not taking action. Clearly, New York State recognized the adverse environmental impact dental waste poses to its residents' lifeblood, our water, air, and marine life. So the questions about mercury in dental amalgam are not only for the placement of mercury in teeth, but resulting effects to the water, air, and food. We are advised to limit fish consumption because of mercury content, especially for women who are pregnant. There is acute understanding that the intentional termination of a pregnancy elevates emotion and debate. Can a cost-benefit analysis of dental amalgam adequately measure the value of a fetus exposed to mercury? Your decision imposes on the deepest debate of what constitutes life. In the 1993 final report on dental amalgam, it states, in quote, and that's from your copy up there, based on experiences with lead exposure, it would be prudent to minimize human exposure to all heavy metals, including mercury. With the efforts underway to reduce mercury use and disposal, the continued use of mercury in dental restorations will account for an increasing percentage of the total exposure to mercury for those with amalgam restorations. However, its health significance may decline as reductions in other environmental mercury exposures results in a decline in overall mercury exposure. Are we to believe from this statement that the totality of an individual's mercury exposure should be evaluated for body burden? Is the effect of mercury in our air, water, and food factored into thresholds regarding how many fillings a person should have, or who, according to their environmental living conditions, is exposed? What about the most vulnerable, our children, individuals with compromised immunity, the unborn? Expecting mothers are full of hope for the possibilities that a newborn brings into this world. After a spontaneous abortion, those possibilities are shattered and one is left with lingering questions. I am one who has had 2 spontaneous abortions and still those questions linger, and I must ask you why. Looking into cause and effect often leads us on a quest that reveals how very connected we all are. The impact of what is believed to be unrelated may turn out to be the very cause, and my questions led me to understand just how 2 healthy pregnancies may have been imperiled by well-intended dental work. At the core, the questions are really about the system that evaluates the efficacy and safety of an intended practice or product. Have all perspectives been exhaustively studied for interrelated effects? Following the second spontaneous abortion, I had been to the dentist just prior to losing the fetus. Dental amalgam was drilled out and replaced with new. Old dental records revealed a related pattern. In speaking with other women who had miscarriages, several also endured a similar sequence of events. A great burden rests with each of you. For each of you must reflect and question whether your decision ensures that the exposure of drilling out and placing new amalgam into the mouth of a pregnant woman poses no harm to a fetus. There are countless studies and articles that depict related health concerns resulting from mercury exposure. What is not clear is how such a toxic substance with a known ability to cross the placental barrier can still be used in fillings. It was shown in a Swedish study that inorganic mercury in cord blood increased significantly with increasing number of maternal dental amalgam fillings. Now that's a study I'd say is worth looking into. Periodic tables of chemical elements list spontaneous abortion as a side effect to mercury exposure. Is your scientific data that exhaustive to refute any connection of mercury and dental amalgam causing no harm to a fetus? Has there been a review of dental records and obstetrical records following spontaneous abortions to look for a connecting pattern? Is an expecting mother given the option to choose whether she is comfortable knowing that a neurotoxin is being placed in the form of an amalgam into her mouth, or advised that the water she drinks and fish that she eats is being contaminated by dental waste? How does the life cycle of mercury used in dental amalgam impact us? Not a day goes by that we don't hear about mercury polluting coal burning industry, which ironically provides electricity for dentist drills to place mercury into people's teeth. Since the first use of mercury in dental fillings over 150 years ago, technology and science have advanced. New products and understanding of science are infinitely different. Still, one story remains the same, and the voices of countless people go ignored or shunned. Their lives are not anecdotal. Mercury is a neurotoxin with known adverse health and environmental effects. Release us from this time capsule shrouded in old science. Does mercury really belong in our teeth and in the cord blood of a fetus? I urge you, do that exhaustive study, and then tell us why we, our water, air, and unborn should be subjected to mercury from dental amalgam. And I thank you for your consideration and time.
Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Painter?
Yes, I have no financial connections with anyone here. I'm a general internist. I've been in practice about 19 years. I was in practice for 5 years, not understanding why in the great, wonderful country we live in, where we know everything, why we didn't understand certain disease processes. It took a few years to look around, get some other information, and to really come to the understanding that when those professors in medical school told me that they were really 10 years behind, I really came to understand what they were talking about, that there was information available for helping a general internist understand how to practice and treat people with chronic illnesses that we really did not learn in medical school. I would like to explain the handout. I've treated approximately 84 patients with amalgam removal, and 25 of those patients wrote letters. And I just want to remind you that I've saved you 2 hours and 15 minutes of public testimony. Okay, laugh, you guys. Okay, well, maybe to lighten you up just a little bit more, I want to give you a little historical perspective. You know, dental amalgam was not first used in the United States. Now, I'm not sure where it was first used, but I do know it was used in Germany before it was used in the United States. The German word for quicksilver, for mercury or quicksilver, is Quecksilber. And from that came the word quack. Now, growing up in internal medicine, in a residency, I heard that word bandied about a bit. But the original historical meaning of the word quack was a dentist who put mercury fillings in patients' mouths. And that actually started a couple hundred years ago, 150 years ago. This is really a discussion and an argument that has gone on for multiple decades. This is nothing new. I really appreciate that these two committees are asking great questions. Quite honestly, I sit there listening to some of this testimony and wonder where the science is. Being trained on the New England Journal of Medicine, I would expect to see studies, longitudinal studies, short-term studies done, just as we've done with aspirin, which was a drug that was grandfathered in. I have not seen any of those studies that truly show there is no toxicity to the use of mercury. In terms of my private practice, I was trained at Creighton University, and what was very important at that institution was that we do good physical exam. They didn't tell me what tattooing was. As I look at patients and see tattooing around a tooth, tattooing where the mercury has literally gone into the soft tissue of the gum, that was something I had to learn in my practice of medicine. Very often, teeth that have mercury restorations will be gray. And I just encourage you, I'm not sure if neurologists examine people's mouths as much as internists do, but I just encourage you to look at teeth. You'll see very discolored teeth. That is very physical evidence that mercury doesn't stay encapsulated once it is put into a person's mouth. In that packet I've given you, in addition to 25 letters, 26 letters. One man was so impressed with his improvement, he wrote a letter 2 years ago, and he wrote a follow-up for you for this meeting. The other thing that is there is I prepared a list of symptoms that have improved with the removal of amalgams. This certainly is not an inclusive list, and in fact, as I listened to some of the testimony today, I realized that there were many other symptoms I could have put on this list. This list I put together by reviewing the letters that the patients wrote, as well as remembering some of the more dramatic cases that I've treated in my own practice. I would like to say that on this 4-page list of approximately 108 dysfunctions, disorders, or diseases, 33% of those are neurological. I would also say that every symptom, disease, or disorder or dysfunction on the list improved in one of the 84 patients that I've treated. I would also say that not all patients get better. Approximately 3.5% of my 84 patients did not notice an immediate change or improvement in the disease I thought they might be mercury toxic with.
One minute.
And some patients die. They're so sick by the time they get to me that they die. In closing, I would like to say that Philippe Semmelweis was a very respectable physician who discovered many years before his time that hand washing would save women from dying of puerperal fever. And hand washing took many decades to come into practice in Austria. So historically, just because amalgam has been used for 150 years, that certainly does not have anything to do with safety. I would like to say that the Lord has established your authority. In addition to your being chosen, however you were chosen to serve on.
Thanks very much for your testimony. Dr. King?
Go ahead. You go to talk with the bag as I go back. Okay. Like I said, no. Okay. So I'm taking your bag back. Okay.
Can we restart this? Could you restart this for me, please? Thank you. My name is William Wayman King III, DMD. I'm a 30-year American Dental Association member. I have no financial conflicts with any amalgam products. I myself paid for my wife and I to fly here yesterday and to stay here and return. First, I want to thank my God in heaven above for saving my life so that I could come here and testify today. You see, I'm really not supposed to be here. I should have died a year ago, and almost did. 1 year and 1 month ago, my aortic aneurysm blew out in my doctor's face as he started an operation to replace a leaky, congenitally defective aortic valve. Most people never make it. I have to praise God that I did. Now I find out that there was a paper that was published in 1976, the year I graduated from dental school, that showed a connection between chronic low-level inhalation of mercury vapor and dissecting aneurysm of the aorta due to enzymatic damage. How nice. I just spent the last 30 years of my life killing myself to do my job, removing and replacing old, worn-out, leaky mercury fillings. Call me the loyal opposition. Neither the FDA nor the ADA warned me that I should have been wearing this NIOSH-approved mask that they just took away from me so I could show you what NIOSH requires miners, mercury miners, to wear when they're digging cinnabar ore out of the ground. Thank y'all for taking that away from me. Anyway, they do have a NIOSH-approved respirator. Do you not realize that all dentists who do remove mercury fillings are really mercury miners also? They use air-driven jackhammers to get cinnabar ore out of the ground. We use air-driven hand pieces and drills to get worn-out mercury fillings out of people's heads. We create extremely toxic aerosols in the process, and then we, the staff and the patient, breathe it all in as if we are invincible. Not so. Today, any dentist who is not protecting himself or herself at work with the mask that I'm not allowed to show you is either one, ignorant or as ignorant of the dangers and as trusting of the authorities as I was for so many years, or perhaps they're already insane, which is another side effect of mercury poisoning, and perhaps with a death wish. 15 years ago, on March the 15th, 1991, I addressed this same FDA Products Advisory Panel. I presented my data proving that many of my patients were being exposed and thus poisoned by extremely high levels of mercury vapor from their mercury fillings, and that college kids who had never had a mercury filling had no mercury vapor in their mouths. Here is my data again. I will pass it out. I hope they give it to you. Maybe someone is listening this time. I sure hope so. There is a chart I have over here that shows scientifically the organs and systems that are harmed by mercury from dental amalgams, silver mercury fillings. And just so you'll know, so you can never say again, well, we haven't seen any science. The bibliography of all that is on the back. Enjoy it. Study it well. You'll be amazed. Contrary to Dr. Mackert's disparaging remarks, the Jerome instruments are calibrated and they are accurate. They only measure mercury. They're not fooled by garlic. They are so accurate. They're on the space shuttle and nuclear submarines, and they sample for 10 seconds, not the 20 he incorrectly so stated. And they also are the most accurate portable devices for measuring mercury vapor on Earth. But what is safe? Okay? What is safe? To know safety, you have to know two things. You have to know how much is coming off of the fillings, and you have to know how much is too much. The packaging for a filling, this is an old one here, it's called Titan, has on it a warning that says contains metallic mercury, poison, skull and crossbones. It also says ingestion may cause neurotoxic, nephrotoxic effects. Keep out of the reach of children. I reckon would that include having them lick it with their tongue? There are plenty of materials, and I've used them for years in pediatric patients for replacing amalgam. So no, there is no reason to have to use an amalgam on a child, and nor should you. And I sure hope you inform the parents first. I have also here two photographs of mercury vapor readings. One is over fresh dental amalgam, and it reads, well, we don't regularly know because it was equal to or greater than 2,000 micrograms per cubic meter of air. 2,000 micrograms. This is a fresh mixed batch of mercury that we all dentists put in people's mouths, but we don't have machines, which they took the other machine away from me, the mercury vapor analyzer. I could mix this for you and show you.
1 minute.
The other one is air over an old latex paint. When my assistants painted her house, they gave her a latex paint old place, and so she did. Came in with headaches. So I said, well, bring in the paint can, I'll check it. We sniffed it. Sure enough, 920 micrograms of mercury in the air over old latex paint, which is why the EPA took phenylmercuric acetate out of latex paint about 15 years ago. So if the EPA can take mercury, cause it not to be used in latex paint for this reason, then why in the world shouldn't the Food and Drug Administration ban mercury fillings for having 2,000 times more concentration than the 300 parts CDC said was in the latex paint, and twice the mercury vapor concentration? It pegged the meter. We don't know, maybe it was 10,000, but it was at least 2,000.
Sorry to interrupt you. Thank you for your testimony. Next speaker is Mr. Worley. Thank you.
Ladies, gentlemen. Afternoon, my name is Johan Worley, and I sometimes work as a law clerk for Consumers for Dental Choice. I'm not here as a regulator, a manufacturer, an environmentalist concerned with mercury pollution, or a victim of mercury poisoning. Instead, I'm here to understand how dangerous medical devices continue to find their way into the lives, homes, and bodies of people I love. This continues to happen despite hearings like these, where science-based policy is supposed to find its basis. Somewhere between the submittal of a 510K or an alarming number of consumer complaints, or the recognition that a substance might not be generally recognized as safe, or petitions from concerned consumer advocacy groups, and the eventual FDA response or lack thereof, the process often corrupts. Pedicle screws, Accutane, silicone implants, Plan B, Vioxx, and yes, encapsulated mercury and amalgam alloy come to mind. The amalgam debate is over 100 years old, a sure testament to the unease people feel about the device. I won't rehash the arguments or talk about how bad mercury is, We're all familiar with them, and we know mercury kills. My being here is just to make sure everyone is on the same page about one thing. Filling cavities with silver fillings is the only instance where a mercury-containing device is intentionally implanted into the human body. And this is regardless of whether a particular human body is small, swollen with child, or more sensitive to mercury than luckier bodies. Because amalgam is an implant by law, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act places the burden on this panel, or at least half of this panel, to explain to the Commissioner why amalgam shouldn't be subject to pre-market approval. This was never done, not in 1994 when the Dental Products Panel recommended that amalgam be accompanied with tepid safety controls, and not since. Instead, to ensure that amalgam is safe and effective for its intended use as a filling material, FDA, in its proposed rule to classify amalgam, recommends that amalgam labeling material list ingredients and that there be labeling instructions against the use of amalgam in hypersensitive populations. Problem is, patients will never get to see the ingredient list, and the very populations that even the manufacturers warn against using amalgam, pregnant women, children, and folks with renal failure, the FDA does not include. FDA has done some real good, they have. Food processing is a far cry from the Chicago slaughterhouse practices that gave rise to the pure food laws. FDA tests devices for both safety and efficacy. Other countries don't do that. FDA even tried to regulate cigarettes as nicotine delivery medical devices in the 90s. Problem is, with silver fillings, FDA is no gold standard. Austria, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, Norway, Finland, Australia, Denmark, Sweden, and the United Kingdom have recommended some form of real restriction on the placement of amalgam. And I can only speak English, so this list is probably short. These restrictions range from contraindications to informed consent regimes to eventual phase-outs. Manufacturers recommend against placement in pregnant women, among others. You'd think that FDA would pay heed. FDA considers a variety of factors when determining whether informed consent is warranted, including whether there are viable alternatives or whether there is, and I quote, substantial public or professional controversy. I mean, placing amalgam has been controversial ever since the first ADA dentists were called quacks for using mercury in dental care. And other countries are at least discussing phase-outs for environmental reasons, as we saw this morning, and because there are good alternative filling options. So why are we still allowing the wholesale placement of mercury amalgam in everyone without meaningful restrictions, and until today without meaningful debate? One more thing. I'd like to point out a problem with Ms. Rosecrans' explanation of 510K approvals for encapsulated mercury and amalgam alloy that she gave this morning. You see, she told us that this morning that new amalgam products are substantially equivalent to amalgam alloy powder, which was classified in the 1980s. However, amalgam alloy is not defined in Section 872-3050 as containing mercury, yet new amalgam devices do contain mercury. So how is it that new amalgam devices like Silverfill, which is 26% mercury and was just approved by FDA in late 2005, how are devices like those substantially equivalent to non-mercury containing devices, amalgam alloy? Vetted against Section 360I of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, how can a device like Silverfill be considered to have, and I quote, the same technological characteristics as a non-mercury containing alloy? Indeed, reading subsection 1A, how can mercury amalgam, and I quote again, not raise different questions of safety and effectiveness than non-mercury containing alloy? The substantial equivalence determinations are a complete sham at worst and incompetence at best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Worley. Ms. Gallagher,
Hi, I'm Kelly Gallagher.
please turn on the microphone for us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Gallagher, and thank you for having this hearing. I'm a 5-time cancer survivor and a documentary filmmaker, and I've been around the world on this issue for the last 5 years. My interest is in the truth. I've been sponsored for this segment of my journey by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. I can assure you I would have gotten here come hell or high drama anyway. I have been the recipient of many life-saving medical devices, 13 catheters, ports, Hickmans, pheresis, 67 blood transfusions, 14 months of chemo, stem cell transplant, and most recently 4 pacemaker operations last September. So I do thank the FDA for your work, and especially Patty Delaney from the Cancer Liaison Division. However, I've also had 17 mercury fillings, and I can't help but wonder if my mercury fillings, also apparently known as dental devices could have had something to do with my diagnosis of Hodgkin's at 20. Mercury inhibits the immune system. I wish I could play you a bunch of video, but I have a little bit. I would like to get this on the record. We have 5 segments.
Now, does the FDA take a position on the amount of mercury that accumulates in the brain and whether or not it's easily excreted from the brain?
The toxicology of chronic implants, like alloy, are looked at through a series of standards that evaluate biomaterials. And most of the evidence that we evaluate biomaterials with come from animal data and come from special exposure studies in animals.
What are not valid scientific evidence on this question? They're interesting, but animal studies don't count.
I have 2 comments with regard to the address by Dr. Lacey. I was intrigued by your slide that stated that animal studies don't count. A former dean of our medical school, when he introduced the new entering class each year of our medical school, he would remind them that our medical school had admitted 72 of them, but that our medical school had admitted 35,000 animals that same year. The point that he was trying to make to our students is that well over 95% of all of our knowledge base that we have in medicine, I can't speak for dentistry, but in medicine, comes almost exclusively from animal research. And the second point that I would like to make with regard to Dr. Lacey's address, I can't comment on most of the papers that he raised, but the one by Drash, I would just like to read from the paper here to correct a misstatement on one of his slides. Drash says, in no case was an occupational exposure to mercury of the parents or an extreme fish consumption of the mother or the child reported. So in fact, they did go to some lengths to survey those patients. I can't speak for the other slides, but I'm astounded by the statement that animal research does not count. That's one thing I felt I had to defend because that's the fundamental basis. I don't want to repeat myself, and I won't. If you review the tapes and whatever, I think it's very clear. I did not say animal research did not count for anything. I made it very clear what it counts for. It does not count for establishing cause and effect relationship between dental amalgam in humans. Human research doesn't count for animals. Animal research counts for animals in terms of establishing cause and effect relationship. It is critically important. It is terribly valuable. We couldn't live without animal research. It gives us our starting point. It gives us information that may be useful when we don't have or can't have human studies. But when we're looking for facts and evidence related to humans, I want human studies. Yes? If I could make just one light rejoinder here. We're not really in an argument, I hope.
No, it's okay. We're well within 3 minutes.
If you in dentistry were to introduce, and I realize this is hypothetical, but if you were to introduce amalgam as a new tooth restorative material in this day and age, forget about phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. You would never get it past the first stage of animal testing with the FDA. So animal studies would be important then.
What are not valid scientific evidence on this question? They're interesting, but animal studies don't count. Testimonials of recovery from illness don't count. Anecdotes, untested speculations or beliefs that do not meet the aforementioned test of validity don't count.
Gallagher.
Religious beliefs don't count when it comes to.
So I would just like to say, and this is very respectfully, I've been all over the place, and everybody keeps contradicting one another, and it's, you know, I'm looking for a hero for the end of our film. We want to focus on solutions. There's been a lot of people that think they're sick. There's been a lot of data on it. There's been a lot of scientists who have done research studies. I am buried by them, so I don't know why the American Dental Association keeps getting up here and saying that there is no studies. They are a trade organization formed to protect their trade, and they're doing their job. They're protecting their trade, but they're not protecting the health of the American people, and I think that many people think they are a health organization. So we're looking for a hero, a government agency that's a hero. We hope that it's the FDA, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. Dr. Grant? Oh. Sorry.
Dr. Fletcher?
Yep, very good.
I'm substituting. My name is Dr. Nathan Fletcher. I'm Vice President of the National Dental Association, and I'm here representing that organization. Dental amalgam has been used as a restorative material in dentistry for over 150 years. Food and Drug Administration stated that there is more significant human experience with dental amalgam than any other restorative material. The National Dental Association supports the findings of the FDA, the National Institutes of Dental and Craniofacial Research, the National Institutes of Health Technology Assessment Conference, the U.S. Public Health Service, and the World Health Organization that dental amalgam is a safe and effective restorative material. The National Dental Association supports the efforts of the National Institutes of Health, Center for Disease Control, and the Food and Drug Administration to continue to study the safety of dental amalgam and to develop new alternative materials that will prove to be as safe and effective as dental amalgam. That concludes my representation of the NDA. I stand before you now as a 20-year practitioner of the field of dentistry. I graduated from my undergraduate institution, Morgan State University, cum laude with a bachelor's degree in chemistry. I graduated 10th in my dental class, and scientific research I did for 5 years with Ford Motor Company before I went into the field of dentistry. I say all of that to give you my background as an individual standing before you with a scientific background. I personally am for informed consent. But with my scientific background, I have to be able to blend science with practicality when it comes to treating my patients. Certainly after giving the informed consent, and as the representative stated, in urban centers, one I happen to practice in, many of the young children that we deal with Medicaid and medical assistance. And when it comes to cost effectiveness, providing the informed consent to a parent with a hurting 2 or 3 or 4-year-old child who can't sleep at night, who can't eat, can't study at school, when I ask them what is their choice after informed consent, inevitably the question is, which one does Medicaid cover? That goes into another debate that this panel should not have to deal with, but I would say that your decision upon how you deal with dental amalgam certainly affects that debate in the broader world, certainly in the world that I practice in. When it comes to technique sensitivity, you've had testimony that after 25 or 35 years that placing some other material makes you a better dentist. That's very far from the truth. When you have a young child who won't keep their head still and you can't isolate the tooth and they're screaming, I can tell you that it doesn't make you a good dentist just to be able to put a filling in there. It makes you a good patient manager if you're successful. Let me emphasize, if you are successful. Because if you are not successful in placing it, you have caused more harm. Certainly more harm than would be done if you placed a dental amalgam in that same situation. The representative made the comment that dentists, when asked, are there other materials? Certainly, in my opinion, every dentist should say that there are other materials. But the real question that should be asked is, are they going to be as effective? In the scenario that I just presented to you with that young screaming child, I can tell you from my own experience, it will not be as effective. I can also tell you that you've heard some testimony from an individual who said that you have to remove 75% of the tooth to place an amalgam. I'm a practicing dentist. I can tell you any tooth that has 75% of it that you would need to remove, you wouldn't be removing it, you'd be removing the tooth. So I don't want you to be misled by the things that are presented to you. No amalgam has ever caused the pain that we're talking about in a child's tooth. No amalgam has ever had a situation that it in itself caused an individual to need a root canal. It in itself has never caused an individual to need a crown. So I do not want you to be misled. I need you to understand from a practical sense, from an individual who practices dentistry, to provide for you pertinent information from personal experience. When we have an incident, one in whatever the factor is, we understand that for that one individual who's had a negative response or a negative situation, in this particular case, since we're talking about dental amalgam, we know that for that one individual, it's 100%. But if we take the statistics of 1 in 100,000, we have 99,999 who've received some benefit from it. Certainly, I sympathize with those individuals who have had these types of negative situations, negative responses, but I also have to sympathize with that young child who can't sleep, can't eat, can't study. And the best technique to use on that child is a dental amalgam. When it comes down to benefit versus harm, what are my choices?
1 minute.
Do I attempt to place some other alternate material, or do I place that amalgam to try to help that child based on their circumstances? In closing, please keep those thoughts in mind. Those are the questions that you haven't heard. You should not be removing amalgam from the armamentarium of the actual practicing dentists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. Mr. Zimmerman?
Hi, okay, this is working. My name is Clinton Zimmerman, and I have no financial interest. However, I have a potential conflict of interest. My dad works for the Food and Drug Administration as a senior regulatory chemist. Mr. Chairman, I cannot help but note that you state on the FDA website that this committee will be studying dental materials which include dental alloys. I hope this is an error, because this committee and the dentists who compose the majority of the committee, metallurgists and engineers on it, surely know by now that amalgam is no alloy, but an unstable mixture with a vapor pressure. Contrary to the statements by the ADA spokesperson, amalgam is the #1 undisputed source of elemental and, in fact, methylmercury in all humans. The fact that the amalgam is the #1 source of elemental mercury has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine. Can you hear me right? Okay, I'm too close. As I said, my name is Clinton Zimmerman, and I was poisoned by an amalgam. I live in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and I have lived here since 1975, as well as California. During the 80s and 90s, I was poisoned badly by a filling installed by a dental practice formerly located just down the street. That practice ended badly, with the partner who placed my filling being locked out of the office by the business owner or the controlling dental partner. The whole affair is currently in litigation in Maryland Circuit Court. You might also like to know that another lady in Germantown was poisoned by amalgam that I know of. I learned of her when signing up for a sauna to detoxify. Unfortunately, her amalgam poisoning was so severe, she got worse after the sauna treatments and had to quit, I hear. I have sat back and watched the drama unfold in the amalgam issue for a while now, and been flabbergasted and deeply disturbed by what I've seen. Perhaps because of my scientific training, I hold an electrical engineering degree, a minor in physics, and was working on my PhD in physics when I was poisoned. I am also an engineer by profession, and the proximity of consumers for dental choice, I am in a unique position to understand the anti-amalgam side of the issue. Certainly, the ADA in testimony before this committee has provided no proof of safety, yet this does not stop them from espousing the safety of amalgam. Do they care to actually cite any studies while making grand pronouncements of safety? Most troubling, though, is the mischaracterization of studies designed to detect average exposure, which by the implications made by the ADA supposedly include determination of toxic effects for those most exposed. That is, the population most at risk from amalgam. This kind of testimony can rightfully be construed as designed to mislead the public and the press, who hold simplified notions of the complex variations in construction and variations in properties which amalgam can take, and depict all amalgams as identical in formulation and HT release. All amalgams are not the same, and all exposure levels are not identical. Indeed, the World Health Organization has stated that no study exists with the statistical power to determine HT exposure and effect in the top 10% of amalgam wearers most exposed to HT from dental amalgam. This from their expert scientist, Mats Berlin. And manufacturers themselves warn or have warned of the wide variety in placement and oral conditions which can lead to variability in the physical and chemical properties of amalgam. No study done or any study cited by the ADA are capable of measuring chronic HT burden in the 1% most exposed. They barely have any studies done with over 500 participants. And all of their measurements use faulty urine or blood testing methods, as I will explain below. The citations of 5 micrograms per day by the ADA spokespeople are just ludicrous. Studies such as the Tübingen study, the largest amalgam trial ever conducted, and authorities such as the NIOM, a Scandinavian dental regulatory organization, clearly document measured and theoretical exposure of elemental HT from amalgam not a couple times normal, not a dozen times normal, not 100 times normal, but several hundred times normal. For example, in an almost unknown letter from the Scandinavian Institute of Dental Materials, NIOM, the intake of metals from copper amalgam was estimated. It is concluded that the intake of elemental mercury in a worst-case scenario can be 350 times that from food. This is due to variations in amalgam construction and oral conditions, as well as the introduction of copper in the newer amalgams, and is well documented in numerous scientific studies. The Tübingen study also measured rare individuals with daily uptake exceeding 750 micrograms per day. This was verified by repeat analysis in those cases, and overall the results of the Tübingen study were in line with previous scientific publications. The reality is that an upper limit cannot be set to exposure. This is due to the great variation in the final reacted amalgam product, whose chemical stability is determined by many factors such as quality of condensation, percent of mercury added by the dentist to the mix, as well as the great variability encountered in oral conditions, which can include substantial corrosion due to factors such as galvanism, crevice corrosion, variability in saliva pH, individual immune reactions with amalgam, and so on. Phase instability and spontaneous mercury droplet formation on the surface of the newer copper non-gamma 2s, the new stuff which I got in the 80s, is also a disturbing phenomena found in some high copper amalgams, which is a very real phenomena. See, for example, Pleva J mercury, a public health hazard, reviews in Environmental Health 1994.
1 minute.
But boosting these underlying toxic potentials of amalgam is another even more important and sinister factor, methylation of HG amalgam by surface bacteria on the amalgam such as S. mutans. In fact, some amalgam victims have reported amalgam surfaces with bacterial interaction to be liquefied. The ADA is blatantly lying when it says that mercury from amalgam cannot be converted to methyl HG. While the basic phenomena of methylation is real and has been documented in more than one scientific paper, see, for example, methylmercury in dental amalgams in the human mouth, Journal of Nutritional Environmental Medicine, 1996, and is even warned against in manufacturer data sheets discreetly as surface electrochemical reactions, this key phenomena is purposely ignored and for all intents and purposes not studied by established dental authorities. And this is the key to what I believe my toxicity is and what you must address as a committee. So let me just leave it there. So I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much. Dr. London?
Yes, thank you for permitting me this opportunity to address this joint committee as you discuss peer-reviewed scientific literature on encapsulated amalgam consisting of dental mercury and amalgam alloys, and review the scientific literature on its potential mercury toxicity, specifically as it relates to neurotoxic effects. My name is Steve London. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Basic Sciences at the College of Dental Medicine in the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. And I'm here today representing the American Dental Education Association and also the American Association for Dental Research. And I happen to be the 2006-2007 Sunstar Butler ADEA, which is American Dental Education Association, Harry W. Bruce Jr. Legislative Fellow, and that is a paid fellowship, and I'm here in that regard. First, I'd like to tell you that the mission of the American Dental Education Association is to lead individuals and institutions of the dental education community to address contemporary issues influencing education, research, and the delivery of oral health care for the improvement of the health of the public. So we represent all the dental schools in the United States, as well as specialty training programs and hygiene programs as well. And the mission of the American Association for Dental Research is to increase knowledge for the improvement of oral health, to support and represent the oral health research community, and to facilitate the communication and application of these research findings. So dental amalgam has long been an important and essential restorative option that academic dental institutions have incorporated into their educational and service missions. New practitioners need to know how to safely place dental amalgam restorations, since for some patients they are the most appropriate and cost-effective treatment option available to them. If this joint committee were to reverse its long-standing support for dental amalgam, it would adversely impact the ability of our member dental schools, institutions, to train practitioners in the use of this restorative material, and most importantly, to provide safe, cost-effective treatment for our patients, which you've heard in various testimonies from various dental practitioners in the community. They've testified that dental amalgam restorations are really an important part of the overall ability to restore dental decay. So any decision about the use of amalgam as a restorative material should be based on sound science and empirical evidence-based research. And we're pleased that the National Institute of Dental and Craniofacial Research has supported two clinical studies that were recently reported in April 2006 in the Journal of the American Medical Association involving a study of amalgam placement in children. And both studies independently reached the same conclusion. Children whose cavities were filled with dental amalgam had no adverse health effect. The findings included no detectable loss of intelligence, memory, coordination, concentration, nerve conduction, or kidney function during the 5 to 7 years the children were followed in that study. And I know you have those studies for your consideration. As dental researchers and dental educators, we will continue to investigate dental amalgam and other restorative materials. As improvements are made, the use of dental amalgam will likely to continue to lessen over time, but we still believe that it has a valuable place in the treatment of patients at this time. Your white paper, which is based on the best available science, corroborates the AADR, that's the Dental Research Association's official policy position on dental amalgam, which was first written in 1996 and revised in 2004. And I think I have the time. I'm going to read, that's 2 paragraphs, what the American Association of Dental Research says about dental amalgam. Quote, dental amalgam has a well-documented history of safety and efficacy in dentistry. Its advantages include ease of handling, durability, and relative low cost. Dental amalgam has numerous indications for use, especially for restorations in stress-bearing areas. That's important in the posterior teeth. Its main disadvantage are poor aesthetics and the necessity for removal of sound tooth structures in order to provide retention for the amalgam filling. Its use in restorative procedures is still indicated. And scientific evidence indicates that currently used restorative materials, including dental amalgam, cause no or very few significant side effects. Extremely small amounts of mercury may escape from an amalgam restoration during normal use, but this minute mercury exposure does not cause verifiable adverse effects on the general health of patients or the dental health personnel. Local allergic or other inflammatory reactions are rare side effects of dental amalgam. The AADR endorses the use of, this is important, best management practices for the use of amalgam restorations in dental offices. And just on a personal note, it's been 25 years since I've graduated dental school, and we handle amalgam much more safely than we did 25 years ago. The amalgam in mercury is provided in a capsule that's safer to handle. It reduces the risk of amalgam exposure, and less amalgam fillings, as we've heard this morning, are being placed. So that concludes my testimony. If there are any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. And it's still green, so I did good.
Thank you for your testimony. I don't see any questions. Thank you. Ms. Taylor.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for holding these hearings. I'm Sue Ann Taylor. I'm with the Consumer Choice and Dental Care Project. I paid for my own airfare to get here. I'm here because I was one of the founders of the Consumer Choice and Dental Care Project. I'm going to try to tell you the story. Doesn't come easily. My own situation could be ditto to about 25 people who have spoken already. I'm not going to put you through that. But quite honestly, even though I was a medical journalist, an independent medical journalist, often on the other side of the FDA, supporting alternative medicine and things like that, the FDA has come a long way in embracing through the NIH Office for Alternative Medicine and things, a greater understanding of complementary care has come about. That was my background. I had all of the information, and I still ignored it even when the symptoms hit me. It was a dentist that discovered all of my problems, got me immediately to a dentist, and in Knoxville, Tennessee, he took out all my amalgams the same day. I don't recommend that. However, 3 days after I had all of those amalgams removed, I was removed of all of my symptoms. I went from sleeping 20 hours a day to, working a full and then some day. I was going to a follow-up visit with the dentist right around Christmas time, and I said, can you please see my son when he comes home? Oh, shoot, sorry. See my son when he comes home. He has a funny thing that happens with his tooth. My son he's one of 3 children. He was one of the super kids. He was the kid in the play, the mentally gifted child, and he was a fabulous big brother. He had an accident teaching his sister how to run a scooter. I'm so sorry. This is a true story. He had an accident. Shattered his front teeth. Rushed him to the dentist like all good mothers would do. Got him to an endodontist. And he came out and he said, the great news is I can save the teeth. Well, as a mother, I was just thrilled with that news. So he's 13 years old, got him patched up, got him off to school, and he goes into the 9th grade. I understand this kid's never had a B, always been in the absolute top of everything. And he failed the 9th grade. I was like, what happened? Well, he's 13, so we went through every doctor and psychiatrist, psychologist. I went from, waiting for the next basketball game to waiting for the principal to call every day. He became so violent. He became unpredictable. He was the best big brother in the world, and all of a sudden, in a single bash, he would send one of his sisters across the room. We're a Quaker family. So the big threat was, if you don't straighten out, you're going to military academy, because they said he needs structure. Okay, we'll get him structure. He goes to military academy, repeats the 9th grade. This is the hardest thing in the world for this kid, and obviously his mother. He does the 9th grade again. He does marginally better. Halfway through the sophomore year, I've moved to Georgia. I had my amalgam issue. Take him to the dentist. He said, I need to x-ray those teeth. Everything you're talking about with his behavior, rapid change in his behavior, would be indicated if he had nickel posts that those teeth were rebuilt around. Well, sure enough, there were nickel posts in there. And I had to make the very hard mother decision to remove those teeth that day. Remove the teeth. He was violently ill for 3 days. At the end of those 3 days, he was his own self again. So he goes back to school. He goes back to school, and I get a call from the school psychiatrist, which was not unusual. She and I had a good rapport by this time. She said, I need to know what drugs you put Michael on. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. And I said, no drugs. We just removed the offending material in the teeth. And actually, the teeth went with them. She refused to believe me. Michael immediately went on the dean's list. No behavioral problems whatsoever. At the end of the year, he goes to the headmaster and says, this is what happened to me. I'd like to skip the next year and graduate with my regular class. And he did with honors. The reason for the tears is in that period of time, there were 3 suicide attempts. And it was just a miracle that I had inadvertently discovered this, because he was on suicide watches, he was on every kind of, they wanted to put him on every drug in the world, and I just had done so much research I wouldn't let the drugs happen. But that's what happened. And in closing, what I would like to say is just examine all of the materials. And if there was research money that would go out for anything, I would say what we need to do is back it up one more step and maybe look at testing to look at what is biocompatible for anybody. You know, there's no short answers in any of this. You'll get 100 dentists that will say mercury is no problem, and 100 that will say that it's a big problem. It's a very toxic material, but what's wrong with the material has a lot to do with what's going on with the patient. And we don't have any of those answers, and it's really under-examined. I thank you so much for holding these hearings.
Thank you. Ms. Tebow?
Good afternoon. My name is Anita Tebow, and I'm here with You Gotta Wanna Productions, and I'm also working for IALMT. And I first would like to thank you for having this hearing and allowing the public to give some very important information that perhaps you at the FDA were not aware of. I'm going to be presenting a short clip of footage that we had taken over the years. Thank you.
Most of the evidence that we evaluate biomaterials with come from animal data and come from special exposure studies in animals. Mm-hmm. And manufacturers are required to know the toxicology profile of their products as part of the controls that they have over their products. The risk is not assessed in terms of any absolute amount or characteristic of the toxicology, but in the context of the risk and benefits in clinical use.
You were here for the previous panel.
Yes.
And you heard some of the researchers and scientists that testified that said that when you chew, when you brush your teeth, when you have hot coffee or hot substance in your mouth, vapors are emitted, and when you chew, some of it flakes off over a period of time, goes into your body. Has there ever been a study done on cadavers, people that have had a lot of fillings in their mouth, to see what the mercury content is in the brain that you know of?
The studies that they cited are the same studies that we reviewed in our process of looking at the literature. And how that relates to our classification is to look at the product in actual use and to look at the risk and benefit. All implants, including hip implants, jaw implants that are made of metal, have metals that leach into the body, plastic materials have volatiles, and we assess all of those exposures. It's not a question whether or not there's an exposure. The question is whether there's adequate evidence that the exposure causes clinical effects.
These other substances you're talking about, though, steel, plastic, they're not in the same class as mercury, are they?
There are problematic compounds that in very low amounts are, for example, there's cadmium in the alloys of hip implants.
And this cadmium, is that consistent with mercury as far as toxicity?
Well, my point is that we...
No, is it? I mean, is it toxic as mercury to the human body?
It has to be put in the context of the level of exposure and what the effect is and how that's offset by the benefits.
You mean to tell me cadmium is as toxic a substance as mercury? Is that what you're saying? Come on.
What I'm trying to do is put it in the context of how FDA regulates products. We do not assess the environment. We do not assess the effect of pure compounds and absolute toxicity.
You do agree?
We look at how they're used in practice.
You do agree, though, that mercury vapors leach out of the tooth?
Yes, we do agree with that.
And that it is ingested into the body in part?
Yes, we do agree with that.
And it gets into the bloodstream?
Yes.
And it goes to the brain and other organs of the body?
Yes, we agree with that.
And mercury has a cumulative effect in the brain?
That is less certain, but there's literature on both sides. It's the clinical impact, though, that is the standard for taking action on medical devices, not the toxicology, not the ability to take preventive actions, but the actual observed effects.
You know, I don't understand why many people in this country, probably the majority, don't know that there's mercury in a silver filling in their mouth, an amalgam. Why is it the FDA doesn't at least, since mercury vapors do escape into the mouth and into the body, why doesn't the FDA at least make people aware of that? Why not publicize that?
The FDA's authority on information about products has to do with the labeling of the products, and only rarely does the FDA actually directly intervene in the way that products are described or presented in informed consent. That's practice of medicine, which the FDA is asked not to get involved in.
I do have a response to that. There are, as was mentioned before, some European countries that have decided to err on the side of caution in combination with some environmental concerns in those countries, and that the labeling has been a universal labeling issue, and that because these companies sell their product worldwide, they decided to put all of those in the labeling. I can quote from a recent FDA document that was dated March 2002 that basically says that they can no longer do that.
What about the mercury in the vaccines, the thimerosal and that sort of thing?
I'm afraid I'll have to get follow-up from someone else in the agency who can comment about vaccines. It's outside of my area.
Well, thimerosal contains mercury that's injected into kids. You heard me talk about that earlier. And I think that's been pretty well publicized, hasn't it? Hasn't the FDA talked about that?
Yes, but I think if you are talking about the informed consent process...
I'm not talking about informed consent. Okay. I'm just talking about making people aware.
I think that's a reasonable request to do that.
Well, then I would make that request, that the FDA, I don't put a card or something in every dentist's office saying that the mercury, the amalgams that you get from your dentist contain approximately 50% mercury. Then let the people make the decision themselves. I think people ought to be held accountable for their actions, but they at least ought to know what the hell they're doing, and they don't.
I'd like to thank the committee once again and all of these courageous people who came here in order to support more information coming out about amalgam fillings, and hopefully the FDA will agree with the proposed idea of a ban for at least, at the minimum, pregnant women. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. I want to go, there are 3 named and numbered speakers who we have not heard from yet. Ms. Virginia Pritchett, if you're in the vicinity, it's going once, going twice. Dr. Okay, so she may be here tomorrow. Dr. Mark Morin? Okay. Ms. Nori Oakes? She will not be here. Okay. Great. Then we'll go on to, as you know, people who wish to speak who are not on the agenda could speak with Ms. Williams, and we have the names of 4 people. We will, I think, 5 minutes each will get us out on about time. So the first of those speakers is Dr. Paul Connett. Are you? Thank you.
Thank you. I have no economic interest in mercury amalgams, but a citizen did pay my airfare down from northern New York. I got my PhD at Dartmouth. I investigated the interaction of metals with biological systems. I mention that because my advisor was Karen Wetterhahn, who actually died from mercury poisoning. She got 2 drops of dimethyl mercury through her gloves, and had scientists all over the world trying to get the mercury out of her body. They did, largely out of her bloodstream. They just couldn't get it out of her brain. The second issue I'd like to mention is, having spent 22 years on waste management, I should tell you that if you put mercury amalgams into someone's mouth and they are cremated, all that mercury is going to go into the environment. There's not one air pollution control device on any crematoria that I'm aware of that captures mercury. So it's destined to go into the environment, period. Now, I would respectfully suggest to you that there's something a little bit more important than protecting the public health. I'm sure you all think that's absolutely number 1. But I would put you today, in 2006, there's a more important thing, and that is protecting the public trust. You have had so much devastating information about a lack of scientific integrity in your agencies, with the pharmaceutical industry running roughshod over the NIH, with the chemical industry running roughshod over the EPA, with the CDC, and it could go on and on and on. You have to restore the public trust. Now, in that connection, let me say 2 things. It just absolutely astounds me that we've had prestigious agencies in this country saying it was okay to inject organic mercury into a baby's bloodstream at over 100 times the level which was deemed safe to eat. This is absolutely extraordinary. And that, when the people find out about that, that will demolish public trust. Now, this afternoon, I go to case number 2. This afternoon, we've heard a whole series of people from talking about prestigious agencies from around the world, the WHO, the WDF, the FDA, the EPA. All these agencies apparently think that dental amalgam is perfectly safe. No problems at all. The science says so. All right? Well, I've spent 10 years on another substance, and you could have changed all that saved all that same testimony, just switched 2 words: fluoride. Fluoride for mercury. We've had the same litany of support from the ADA and all these organizations tell you it's perfectly safe to put fluoride in the drinking water. But the difference between fluoride and mercury for me is I've studied the issue for 10 years. And I can tell you categorically, the science from the ADA on this subject is absolutely atrocious. The science on this subject from the CDC is absolutely atrocious. In fact, I would say the CDC has been captured by the ADA on this issue. Let me give you one example. The EPA asked the NRC, the National Research Council, to review the safe drinking water standard, which is currently at 4 parts per million. We fluoridated at 1 part per million. They came back and said the standard is too high. It has to be lowered. You need to do a health risk assessment. Immediately, the ADA said this is not relevant to water fluoridation at 1 part per million. And within 6 days, the CDC is saying this is not relevant to water fluoridation. They had done no health risk assessment. They didn't have time to read the report. They certainly didn't have time to read all those references. That wasn't physical science. That was political science. They were protecting a policy. One word we haven't heard today is liability. A lot of what you heard from the ADA is not protecting the public, it's protecting their rear ends from the liability of the lawsuits which are going to ensue the moment anybody indicates that there is a problem here.
1 minute.
And as far as numbers are concerned, you heard about the safety factor of 30 that was used at some point from the lowest observable effect level. Let me tell you the safety factor that they used for fluoride. This is the EPA when they established the Safe Drinking Water Standard. They took a limited amount of data for adults and they applied a safety margin to take into account the very young to the very old to the sick with people with kidney dysfunction. You know what safety factor they used? 2.5. Public trust, ladies and gentlemen, you're running out of time to reestablish that. We heard today that 4 micrograms of mercury per milliliter of blood. Just a little bit of chemistry on that. That's 10,000 trillion atoms of mercury. 10,000 trillion atoms of mercury per milliliter when you're talking about...
Dr. Khan, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Just one last sentence. I hope you will listen extremely carefully to Dr. Boyd Haley tomorrow. I think his critique of those AMA studies is absolutely solid. I think his work is solid, and it's absolutely imperative, in my view, that you are certain that you are protecting the public here. You've got to be absolutely certain. You're like building a dam above a village.
One sentence, you said.
This is just finishing that sentence. You've got to be absolutely certain, which means you look at all the evidence. You look at the biochemical evidence, you look at the animal evidence, you look at everything. And then you have a weight of evidence, and don't forget the Swedes. The precautionary principle is what we need here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Isabella DeMade, are you available? Thank you. Again, 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here representing the European Commission. I'm a Commission official responsible for the regulation of medical devices in the European community. So I thank you to give me this opportunity to give you a short, very short, brief overview of where we stand at the moment. I won't go back to what my Swedish colleague said about how medical devices are regulated in the European community. Dental amalgams are regulated under the medical device legislation. They are considered as Class 2B products, which means that the manufacturer has to comply with essential requirements which are in the European legislation. And I will just repeat 2 sentences of these essential requirements, and I think we all share the same concerns. Under the intended conditions of use, the medical device shall not compromise the health, the clinical condition and safety of patients, and the safety of health and users. And also, any risks which may be associated with their use, the medical device, should constitute an acceptable risk when weighed against the benefits to the patient. So these are parts of the essential requirements medical device have to comply with. This is being reviewed by a conformity body, which we call the notified body. Now, briefly, I will go to the situation in the member states as we are informed at European level. We have been requested by the European Commission to review the implementation, how dental amalgams are used in the different member states. The feedback we have is that in all member states but one, but that will be next year, dental amalgams are still used. The trend is that there is a decrease in this use. The decrease depends on the country. If you ask me to quantify this decrease, I wouldn't be able to do it today. Some member states, as you hear today, have introduced specific recommendations to use alternative fillings for specific patient groups. This you have heard today. These are the United Kingdom, Germany, Austria, Denmark. As far as Sweden is concerned, we have been informed in June this year of the intention to ban the products, to ban mercury in dental amalgam. This is for environmental reasons. The reason they gave us is environmental. Due to our internal rules, this is being reviewed now by our lawyers. We have to check that this doesn't infringe internal market rules. And the ruling probably should be on our side before the end of the year. Now, as far as the European community is concerned, we in the European Commission had convened an expert group to review evidence regarding the use of dental amalgam in 1993. I think this was quoted this morning also. According to this expert panel, there was no reason to restrict the use of dental amalgam at that time in view of scientific knowledge. As much of you know, we are under increasing pressure to review evidence and see whether there is a scientific ground to restrict the use. Basically, we have a Commission communication on the community strategy on mercury. Basically, the communication supports restriction of emission and my English is emission and what do you say? Exposure of the patients to mercury. Within that framework, our services have been requested to review the use of dental amalgam and to ask the opinion of the appropriate scientific committee. So there's this basically community strategy. There's also consumer groups, just like here, who put us under pressure, but so far, mostly for environmental concern. So the Commission will request the opinion of the appropriate scientific committees which have been established under committee rules on the safety of use of dental amalgam and alternative fillings to human health. If we have to make a risk management decision or to make formal recommendations, as some member states have done, we need to review the evidence on mercury and also on alternatives. Now, very briefly, someone this morning has asked a question about the legislation on waste. Although I'm not an expert in this, there is a legislation on hazardous waste in the Commission, and mercury has been listed as a hazardous compound. Based on this legislation, most member states have passed legislation for the disposal of mercury dental amalgam. And the Commission has been requested under this committee strategy to review the implementation of this legislation. So this is what I can say at the moment.
Thank you very much. One question.
Salman Amar, thank you. You mentioned that there is a trend in the reduction of amalgam placement, but you could not quantify. Mm-hmm. Would you say that this trend results from aesthetic concerns or perceived toxicity?
I cannot say right now.
Thank you again. Dr. Stephen Marcus, are you available to speak? I'm just repeating for the transcriptionist your desire to switch to tomorrow, but I'm looking for guidance as to whether that's possible. Okay. Done. Dr. Andrea Brockman.
Hi, I'm Dr. Andrea Brockman. I was a practicing dentist for about 25 years. Prior to that, I was an intensive care coronary care nurse. I would like to address the FDA today on terms of labeling and in terms of exposure to female dentists and hygienists and dental assistants and office personnel that work in the dental office. When I was a nurse, I had broken a thermometer in the hospital, and that room was quarantined until it was safely removed. And that stuck with me, that this was a toxic substance, of which a thermometer held about 780 milligrams of mercury. When I went to dental school 4 years later, I started working on the dental clinic floor, where there were about 300 dentists mixing amalgam, squeezing it with squeeze cloths, dropping it on the floor, burning their instruments to get the amalgam off, no ventilation, which did not make a whole lot of sense to me if we were being quarantined for one thermometer and there was the equivalent of about 300 broken thermometers or more a day. This concerned my exposure to myself as I was pregnant at the time. And when I went to ask the dental professors why we are using mercury, I was quickly suppressed and said, "We don't discuss that. It gets locked into the fillings. It's safe." And I said, "But what about me? I'm pregnant." And I was just told that I should not make any waves. 2 months later, in my 3rd month, I had a spontaneous abortion, which probably saved my life because being exposed to all of that mercury, and since it does go through the placenta, that fetus probably took a lot of the mercury out of my body. This did not keep me from being in and out of the hospital with cardiac arrhythmias, migraine headaches, panic attacks, and I was a very healthy person prior to dental school. When I got out of dental school, I had opened up a practice with my husband, and intuitively I felt that I did not want to use mercury in the practice, and so I had begun using composite resins, and at that time we didn't even learn about posterior composites in dental school. They weren't around at the time. We were just using 2 mixed paste to paste, and I was using them in patients' mouths, and I had them placed in my own mouth, which I still have some today, and that's 27 years later. There were women that were working in my office that had worked in other dental offices, that had infertility problems, that were suffering from depression, that were having chronic migraine headaches, suicidal, and I thought this was kind of unusual to be in a dental office that had so many women being sick. And from what I understood from my colleagues, there were similar problems that were going on. I was pregnant again and had some difficulty getting pregnant, though. It took me three more years. And at the time, I was not using and placing amalgams, but I was drilling out fillings. I was drilling out amalgams in the order of probably 10 to 30 a day. I had not worn masks. I had not worn gloves because this was pre-AIDS, and we did not have to protect ourselves at that time. And so I worked through my 9th month of pregnancy, not wearing gloves and mask, and exposing me and my fetus. Had very difficult delivery. My child, who did not have, I nursed my child in the office, brought him in with me till he was 8 months old. He has suffered from depression. He has had mercury that was in his, on a challenge test in his urine, very high levels. He had suffered from hyperactivity, asthma, and a number of other things. Did not connect the dots. Got pregnant again, was working on through my 9th month of pregnancy, and I was realizing at this time now that maybe I should contact the American Dental Association to find out what my exposure was as a female dentist drilling out mercury amalgam.
Okay, I have to stop you there, sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Our last speaker of the day. Could you please identify yourself?
Thank you, panel. My name is Karen Palmer from Pennsylvania. I'll probably need to apologize in advance for anybody that I may offend through what I have to say this afternoon. I'll keep it very brief. As you know, we were able to submit letters to a gentleman from the FDA, who I thank again, about situations concerning mercury. And so I just have a couple of those that I submitted to share with you. This one was dated July 27th. I handled mercury every day for years as a dental assistant until 2 years ago when I was diagnosed with heavy metal toxicity to mercury and lead. I am no stranger to no stranger to neurotoxicity, for I am still numb on the entire left side of my body. Chelation takes care of the detox, but what about the overall damage as a result of being toxic? What a false sense of security all those years of taking precautions with wearing a mask only to learn that the vapors go right through it. Much to my discredit, I now know more about mercury toxicity than in all those years when I was working with it. Where and when were all the continuing education courses to warn us of the dangers? My former boss is still in denial of all that's happened to me and continues to place amalgam every day. He thinks I've been misdiagnosed and still haven't found the real cause to all my problems. He worships the ADA and thinks he is protected from any backlash or lawsuits because he's a longstanding member and they maintain it's safe unless you are allergic. What I have is no allergy. It is criminal that they are allowed to cover up and mislead and misinform. What's it going to take to wake up everyone on this? It's so sad that people are not given all the information in order for them to make informed decisions for themselves. Mandatory informed consent would help, and it's a start, and some states have it, but not all are on board. Pennsylvania is one of the worst, lagging way behind on current information. As crazy as it sounds, Oprah Winfrey gets quicker results and responses than the entire federal government daily, with over 40 million viewers just in this country alone. How sad. What's in your mouth? Got mercury? August 21st, another letter to the FDA. I was diagnosed with heavy metal toxicity from mercury and lead in May of '03. After a full year of testing, I was told at one point that I had MS because of the sensory disturbances. Neurotoxicity and toxic neuropathy is no allergy, as the ADA would like us to believe. I gave the best years of my life in a profession as a dental assistant, taking all the precautions with gloves and masks and glasses, only to learn that the mercury vapor goes right through it. Optimal ventilation is so key, or so I've come to learn, not minimal, which is what most offices have. Patients should be given the information on the MSDS sheets. The doctors that still insist on using amalgam silver mercury fillings because the ADA still says it's safe is causing great harm to themselves, staff, and patients. Many months of chelation have lowered my toxic levels, thank God, and I am so encouraged. All the paresthesia, neuropathy, and the chronic fatigue I continue to endure. What's it going to take for all involved to wake up? Nobody wants to be held accountable for all the damage that has been done and allowed to occur and continues to go on. I had silver fillings in my teeth. My former employer said my levels didn't come from my mouth. Afraid of backlash, he still continues to place the mercury restorations. Do you see and hear how huge of a crisis this is at hand? People in the environment are being ruined. Please make it stop, starting with the ADA. Enough already. There are other safer materials to use, but not as easy to place and not as quick and more costly. The dental insurance companies want to pay for the least expensive, and so the doctors are, in effect, letting the insurance dictate treatment, which they claim to never do. So involving and confusing, no wonder no one wants to open this can of worms, so to speak. The deception that is allowed to continue is nothing short of criminal. Mercury is a neurotoxin, brain poison, that does not belong in any form, ethyl, methyl, organic, inorganic, no safe amount in the human body. Nor do the fish that we can no longer eat or the vaccines that are supposed to protect us. I could go on and on. What's next? No swimming? It's in the air, it's in the water, it's in the ground, but placing it directly in the mouth, 2 inches from the brain, is just ludicrous beyond reason. Ah, the old argument, but it's been used for 100 years without any problems. Buzz, wrong answer. Just because the ADA says it so doesn't make it so. And who are we and where are who is their peer review? Everyone has a boss, and that is where the FDA should step in and set the high and mighty ADA straight once and for all.
I'm going to interrupt you. Thank you. Well, I want to briefly apologize to all the speakers I had to interrupt. I think by setting a time that everyone could stick to makes it as fair and equitable. I'd like to thank everyone for their respectful communication of views, which at times are sharply divided, but it's one wonderful opportunity that we have a place where we can share those opposing views in a polite and respectful environment, so I appreciate everyone's contribution to that. I'd like to thank Drs. Mackert, Cohn, and Phillipson for their presentations earlier today, particularly to Dr. Cohn and Phillipson for traveling here to share with us their perspectives, to Dr. Alderson and Kennedy and Ms. Rosenkrantz for giving us information from the FDA perspective. I'd like to thank Representative Watson. Also, there are people who traveled great distances, Dr. Wilson, Ms. Kilmartin, Dr. DeMade. Appreciate them particularly, everyone who had the courage to stand up and tell their story. It's important for everybody to hear that, so thank you for doing that. At this time, we will adjourn for the day. We will reconvene at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning with a continuation of the public hearing. Thank you.